Greetings, developers and Moralis mages. My name is Phil. I'm the head of research for Moralis. Welcome to another Moralis workshop live event during the Moralis Avalanche Hackathon. This time we are here with the CTO of RugDoc, sorry about that. And RugDoc is a great app. I've been checking it out today. It has a lot to do with how you can check out different apps that they've reviewed to see whether or not there's a high chance of them pulling a scam, pulling a rug out from under you and running away with your money. The ones that are rated lower risk have a lower chance of that, whereas the ones that are rated high risk have a very high chance of that. And if please take it away here, RugDoc.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for the intro, Phil. And thank you so much for having me. It's always been so great to see other developer spaces show up, because for the longest time everything was so focused on users, which is amazing, but in order to give users that great experience, it really falls onto developers. So being able to empower our developers to build better is something that I'm really excited to see in the space. So big fan of Moralis, and obviously like big fan of Avalanche, so I'm really happy to be here with you today. Yeah, so today I wanted to give a little bit of a talk about like who we are and how we can help developers in the space to build a better DeFi project, which hopefully will increase user confidence and make everybody happier. So with that said, let's learn how to make a DeFi project that doesn't suck. First, let's give a little introduction in case you don't know who we are. We are RugDoc.io, and we're a community-oriented crowdsourced team of DeFi users. So we are really a project that is from the community and we're by the community. We really just are a pile of community people who were tired of getting scammed, decided to teach ourselves Solidity and learn how to basically review contracts. And so now we provide ethical and independent project reviews for all manner of DeFi projects, from like NFTs, tokens, games, farms, DEXs, and aggregators. And we do that all for free. So anybody can come on in and request a review for any of the above DeFi projects, submit the contracts to us, and we will theoretically get it all done and reviewed within 36 hours. This is not to say we're an audit. We're not an audit. We're a review. There's a reason that we can get dozens of these things done every day, and that's because we're not providing, an intense audit. But we, of course, work with one of our partners, Paladin, to provide audits when they're needed. But basically, we're always trying to make a great, free, easy resource for the DeFi community. We want to be able to be building tools for the community, so we do. We want to be able to educate the community and empower them. And so that's exactly what we do here. And part of the way that we do this is by building out a ecosystem built around community security. Some of that relies on safety. So these are going to be things like our contract reviews and just education that's going to teach people what to look for and what types of things that they want to consider about code elements or token valuations, or just generally how to compare DEXs or how to compare audits. We also keep a pretty large and a very active community. So we're always around on Twitter and on Telegram, and on multiple other social media platforms, answering questions and just general DeFi chatter. We provide a lot of more degen activities as well. So one of the ways that we do that is by creating basically specific communities for like these more, fast and just generally more degen aping sorts of activities. And then we provide a lot of tools and just other resources as well. So we create things that users may want in order to, get out of protocols or figure out how to become better investors. And we also create a lot of tools and resources for our developer community. And that can be everything from helping them develop their project, answering questions, helping them with all sorts of pre-launch problems that they might have, and supporting them through marketing services, just getting people on board and getting our community on board with their project, and lots of ways that we work with both our users and our developers. Our goal is to make DeFi safer. And part of the reason and part of how we make DeFi safer is, like I said, we focus on both user resources and developer resources. On the user end, we're really working on tools, and these tools are going to be things like an LP breaker tool. So they literally can just break up an LP if they've messed around in a custom DEX and it just shuts down, or maybe it fails. We create honeypot token checkers, which will check for basic honeypot scams, emergency withdraw and revoke tools that work on pretty much every chain and on unverified contracts. We really just want to be able to empower users to feel like they make better decisions through our tools, education, and reviews. On the developer side, though, we really focus on proper audits when needed. If a review is just not going to cover it, we want to be able to work with them every step of the way with Paladin in getting them proper contract reviews. We also offer consultation services to really make sure and discuss all sorts of possibilities and how to really hone and improve a project before it launches, since we're in the unique position of having been here a while and having looked at thousands of DeFi projects at this point. I like to think we give pretty good advice. And then we also offer security suite services, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And those tend to just increase user confidence. And these are going to be things like free liquidity locking or KYC services. So we're trying to just help everybody get along a little bit better and make this a safer and more enjoyable experience for the most people we can. Let's talk first about some of the most common rugs and scams that are out there. So I would say the most detrimental, the most absolutely tragic experience is going to be a hard rug or a hard exploit. And all of these words are very subjective because none of these words really have any one particular definition. You're not going to find any of these words in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. But commonly, hard rugs are going to refer to these catastrophic losses where a user interacts with a contract and that contract is able to just steal all of their tokens or all of their LP. They just take it all and they're probably never going to see that again. So a user will just think that they're, I don't know, maybe in a yield farm throwing in their ETH BNB pair, and next thing you know, their ETH BNB has been eaten by this protocol and is in a dev wallet and tornadoed out, and they're never going to see it again. This is the main focus that we work on at RugDoc, trying to prevent these because, again, they're the most catastrophic and there's not much you can do once it happens. You can't really recover it in 99.9% of cases. Much more common and things that we still try and work with is the community really cares about soft rugs, and the community is going to shout rug every time something happens. And it's not necessarily rug, right? A token price can just naturally go down and the community will say it's a rug, and it's not. The token just went down, and that is how it is. But in a soft rug, it usually happens with a malicious intent where the developer has allocated a large amount of tokens and then just cashes out and crashes the price. Or they just, maybe just straight up abandon a project, or just these more subtle human factors that can occur. So they're rarely as catastrophic as a hard rug, but for the user, they can still result in very serious losses. Honeypot scams are a token problem, and it basically means that a user has bought a token and they can never sell their token again. And users are particularly aware of this sorts of scam because there's so many token buyers out there. There's a lot of retail overlap, and it's not just, your DeFi people who are, already knowing how to yield farm or aggregate or play games. So in the Honeypot scam, basically the user buys a token that they can never sell. So the price looks like it's constantly going up. So the user gets really excited when they see their $100 dog token go all the way up to like $10,000. They try and cash it out and they can't sell because the only person that can sell it is the dev, and they do, and then they crash the price and they walk away with all the funds. Another one of the scams that is fairly common is going to be just a pre-sale theft, and these there's honestly not much you could do about. So we're just really trying to educate users for this type of a theft, that a pre-sale is not a guarantee of anything, and you're just trusting somebody with your money. So this is something that users are aware of, and it's something that you as a developer need to be cautious when you're embarking on a pre-sale, to really gain community trust and to actually follow through on dates and times and deadlines, or else your community is going to be very nervous that you've just walked away with a pre-sale and they've just given you all of their funds and all of their USDC and you've just left. And then finally, there's just failure to receive like an airdrop or an NFT or some promised good. I would say this is probably like the most mild of everything, because it's just someone who's saying, oh, if you invest by tomorrow, or if you buy 100 of my dog coins, you'll get an exclusive airdrop, and you don't get the airdrop. But you still have your dog coins and you still have your underlying assets. But still, these are all scams that users are going to be very aware of and they're going to be on the lookout for. So the things that you as a developer really need to be considering how you're going to approach your language and approach your follow through to make sure that your users are confident that you're not trying to like pull one of these scams. Some red flags for users is going to be, honestly, most users understand in DeFi that the code is going to rule everything. So they understand that what is written in a smart contract lays out what a project can and cannot do. So some more savvy users, they're actually going to be able to go through the contract and they're going to be able to just like Control F for basic functions that make them nervous, or just even look through and they'll see something that says like mint, or they'll see something that says transfer, and they might have questions about that. So it is important to think about like how your contracts look and how your contracts are notated, because some users will go through your codes and they will start to pick up what could be red flags, or what they think are red flags. Users also care deeply about social and community activity. So basically, you want to make sure that when you have launched your project, that your socials and community is built to really empower users and to make them feel like this is a friendly and safe environment, and that whatever your personality is and whatever type of user you're trying to attract, this is a good home for them. So you want to be regular. You want to have mods who are there like 24/7, because do remember, DeFi is 24/7, 365. So even if it's Sunday night at 2 a.m. on a holiday, there's plenty of people in the world who it is Monday afternoon and it is just another day in DeFi. And if your chats are unmoderated, things can start to get hectic. You can start to get spam all in there, or porn, or goodness knows what going on in your chats and in your community. And it just doesn't look like it's a healthy, secure, or, a place that users are going to want to hang out in. Users also look for developer history if you have one. So I'd say most users really do like to know what your history is, especially if you have previous history in DeFi. They want to hear about what you and your team have done, what other projects you've worked with, hopefully they're projects that they're familiar with and that they enjoyed, or how basically like who you are, what background you came from. Are you a developer? Were you I don't know, a graphics designer? They want to hear about that sort of stuff. And pending what your history is, or if you're associated with some sort of a project that, I don't know, a user finds negative, or they just like think your history for some reason is unqualified, that could pop up as a red flag for them too. Sudden stealth launches. Of course, there are a couple situations where this may be appropriate if, I don't know, that you're about to get swarmed by bots when you launch your project. But sudden stealth launches usually freak users out a little bit, because most projects just suddenly appear out of nowhere without talking to anybody, or without launching soft socials, or without forming a partnership, or without talking to the community. They think it's just going to try and like pull some sort of a cheap scam and disappear. Unverified contracts. This is something that we particularly have pressed on with our users to look for. If you can't read a contract, run away. It's usually very easy to verify your contracts. So the second that your project is about to go live, and honestly, before your project is about to go live, make sure your contracts are verified, because users want to, at least, even if they can't understand everything that's in the contract, they want to feel secure that someone can look at this contract and that it's verified, and that, this is not some mystery box that they just have to trust. Some of our more savvy DeFi users, we've talked and educated about the importance of understanding a proxy contract and what it means. Of course, there are useful moments for proxies. They can be incredible tools to use, but most users are also aware that a proxy contract means that you can just upload anything. So when you have a proxy contract, you need to be able to explain to your community exactly what it's there for. And honestly, you should be able to let them view a verified contract of what exactly is in the proxy, and what could be lined up, as well as probably keep like a longer time lock on that sort of a situation. Finally, migrators. This one's a bit controversial because, of course, like proxies, migrators can have a very important place in the world, but they're also the most common scam out there. So why are migrators red flags? Well, I can tell you, as someone who deals with community security and basically reviews contracts for a living now, most of our security alerts are migrators, and they are highly accurate. Out of all of the alerts that we've ever had for projects that have migrators, 90% of them have scammed. So there's only 2 that are still active. Um, Pretty much of all of our alerts, they can play a valid role, but they're rarely used in legitimate projects. If you even think of the Pancake Swap situation, which a lot of people will, oh, Pancake Swap has a migrator. They actually didn't use their migrator to do their migration, and they did not implement a migrator in their version 2 contracts. So rarely are migrators used successfully in legitimate contracts. These are usually where you want to use strategies or maybe a proxy, because migrators are just commonly cheap scams. They're very low effort, and it's honestly a shocking amount of the DeFi scams out there are just migrators. And the community knows to look for them, and they get kind of freaked out when they see a migrator now. All right, so that's enough of the background. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of why you guys are here, because you want to hear about how to launch a DeFi project that hopefully doesn't suck and is safe. So in this part, I'm going to go through and talk about all sorts of elements that you're going to want to understand when you're building a protocol. And this can be anything. This can be an NFT, this can be a token, this can be a farm, this can be some sort of a crazy swap, or this could be like a DAO. All of these things are going to be relevant so long as you're like employing decentralized assets. So we're going to talk a little about a basic like supply and demand. We're going to talk a little bit about just like tokenomics, allocations that you want to think about, emissions, other elements that are going to go in your code, different types of liquidity and what you're going to want to think about with your liquidity, how you're going to assemble a team, security, what your options even are, and what sorts of things that you want to be thinking about in terms of creating a secure protocol, because if your protocol is secure, everybody has a good time. And then finally, we want to talk about like sustainability. And these are going to be things like setting up a treasury, making sure that you know your investor, and just being able to move and be in the right place at the right time and move the trends in DeFi, because DeFi moves fast. And if you're not here at the right time, you can get left behind. So let's talk a little about supply and demand. What is supply? Supply is arguably one of the most crucial factors in design of tokenomics and understanding the value of a token or a coin. Why? It's because it determines the market cap and valuation of your token. So generally in crypto, we need to specify the type of supply, because there are 3 types of supply out there. There's the circulating supply, total supply, and the maximum supply. And the supply of your token will change over the course of its lifetime due to minting and emissions, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So when we're talking about the circulating supply, this refers to tokens that are accessible to the public at any specific point in time. This is in contrast to the total supply, which is going to tell you the number of coins in existence, which is going to be like the number of coins already issued minus the coins that have already been burned or destroyed to control your supply. The total supply is going to be the total amount of the circulating supply of coins that are locked and destroyed. So it's going to be all the tokens that are out there. The maximum supply is going to be the maximum amount of coins that will ever exist. And this can include things that are not yet minted or made available. So this is why we need to specify when we're talking about supply, what we're talking about, because these 3 different types of supply are going to change throughout the lifetime of your project. Supply alongside price is going to talk about your market capitalization, which is one of the best measures of value for an asset or security. And most users understand this. So they're going to want to make sure that they understand the market cap, and part of that is going to come from your supply calculations. It is important that when we're talking about market cap, the key phrase of tokens is the in circulation supply, because almost every project has tokens that are not in circulation if they've been mined or minted or they're lost or they're locked. So this is a circulating supply problem. The increasing number of coins over its lifetime, especially if you have one of these like high emissions tokens, which is most DeFi projects, this is going to lead you to try and consider how you need to control your supply. And so considering your initial mint, the token cap, and the emissions rate are going to be critical factors in determining your value through supply and by controlling supply. And some ways you can control your supply are going to be by controlling your mint and emissions rate, or by doing things like burns or locking or vesting or staking. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. Most tokens in DeFi have absolutely massive supplies, right? So if you think about it, Doge is one of the largest assets by market cap, and it's minted 100 billion coins within the first 2 years, which is reflected in the incredibly low price per token, which you can compare to something like Bitcoin, which only ever has a supply of 21 million coins at the end of its mining period. So you can kind of see a little bit here how your supply is going to influence your tokenomics and your token value price, right? We can consider something like a coin such as Bitcoin or a coin like YFI, which is going to be able to grow more in price given its current market capitalization, compared to Doge, which has like a tens of billions market cap, due to the differences in supply, which is something to consider as a developer during design, as well as to know when you're an investor. Let's talk a little bit more about tokenomics, because I did just throw that word out there. Tokenomics is a word commonly used in the crypto space when talking about the economics of tokens, and it basically means how the project is structured to deliver the tokens to your users, as well as your team, your advisors, marketing, and any other use that's out there. It's a super broad word, and again, you're not going to find this word defined in any one particular way in any one particular dictionary. But let's talk a little bit about these like economic factors that you're going to want to think about with your tokens and assets. One of the things that you need to think about when you're drawing up your documents to talk about your tokenomics or even explain your tokenomics to your users is how you describe what you're doing. And I like to talk about the rule of KISS. Okay, keep it simple, stupid. Because investors are going to ask repeatedly for a description of your tokenomics. They're going to ask repeatedly for your roadmap and how it relates to tokenomics. So you're going to want to keep it short, simple, and easy to understand. Why do we care about this so much? Because DeFi is international, and you can be having a conversation with someone from Malaysia, China, Turkey, and the US all at the same exact time. So if the investor's grasp on whatever the main language for your project isn't at a high level, which is honestly going to be a lot of your users, you're going to lose that investor since they won't understand how the project works and they're going to care about it. So again, you need to think about your tokenomics, and especially how you're going to describe your tokenomics to your community. Let's talk a little bit about the 2 most common types of tokenomics out there, inflationary and deflationary. In inflationary tokenomics, it means that your token does not have a maximum supply, and it emits at a steady and generally large amount per block. Most tokens are established in such a way that these new coins are created on a regular basis, infinite. So they're basically these infinitely minting tokens that have high emissions rates, and you see a lot of these in things like yield farms that have very high APR. If a token has a limit on how many coins will ever be created, it will have a maximum supply, which will limit the supply end of the supply and demand problem. But when you're infinitely minting tokens, that's obviously going to change because you're never going to have a limit on how many tokens you can create. So you need to consider what method you want to go with. When you have an inflationary token, it's going to have high APR. You're going to get a lot of coins, but unfortunately, you can reduce the value of your coins in circulation, and your supply can get out of control. You're also going to need to figure out how to deal with your inflation, because too much inflation is going to reduce the value of your coins. And so it's going to impact your prices. So if we think of something like pancake swap, it's a good example of inflationary tokenomics because the inflation keeps the APR pretty high, but they also carefully control the emissions and how they're going to like burn things and lock things, and they make sure the supply doesn't get out of hand. So you're probably going to need to figure out how you need to control your supply, and that could be manual burns, or it could be some sort of a built-in burn, or maybe it's going to be a lock period, or maybe it's going to be some sort of a buyback program. This is going to mean that you need a calculated and active team that's able to make tough decisions at any time to maximize the upside of this method. So again, inflationary tokenomics can be good. It's incredibly common, but it's actually the most complicated tokenomics method that we have in DeFi because it requires an on top of it team. When you have deflationary tokenomics, this is the exact opposite. So it pretty much means your token has maximum supply, reduced emissions over time, or both. And so it basically creates a reduction of your supply over time, which creates a shortage of supply. This means that your token is more scarce, and it means that your token probably has more value. Not always, but just generally. Basically, deflationary assets are fairly stable, but they come at the price of usually there's reduced emissions, which means that your APR is going to be lower, which means that your community may not think that this is super awesome. Deflation can make your asset very valuable. Think of Bitcoin again with its 21 million total mint, and the fact that its block is cut in half every 4 years. But again, you can negatively affect your APR, you can turn off potential new investors. And so to maximize the upside with a deflationary method, you probably want to start with a large maximum supply, burn some tokens manually as a first line of defense instead of reducing emissions if the price starts to go down, and take it from there and just try and adjust your emissions slowly. These are usually more long-term considerations or things that have smaller amounts of pools. But if you're going to build on top of whatever your project is with additional strategies, like maybe you make a farm and you build a vault on top of that and a stable swap on top of that and other features, deflationary tokenomics can be a really good thing because you want to basically be able to create users who are in there for the long haul as you slowly develop and roll out features. All right, let's talk a little bit more about tokenomics. Coins can be created two ways usually in DeFi: fair launch or pre-mined. In a fair launch, there are no token allocations at the initial minting and mining process. You basically start from zero, and anyone who wants to mine, mint, or own a coin theoretically has an equal opportunity to grab one at the start. Whereas when you have a pre-mine or pre-mint situation, there's an allocation that the team behind the project has mined or minted. This is not necessarily a bad thing, but your community will probably notice. And if you do have like a pre-mine, it's something to consider how you're holding your funds, who has access to the funds, and what your community understands you're doing with that pre-mine pre-mint, because it could be a dump risk to them. If too many tokens are allocated to the team, it can also limit the growth of your price, right? Because if your team is holding 70% of the tokens, not only is this a dump risk, it basically means that you only have the ability of 30% of a market to grow on, which is not enough. So that's something to consider. Other factors that can impact your supply and valuation as it relates to tokens are going to be your vesting and your staking. So vesting applies to your pre-mined, pre-minted coins and refers to the allocation schedule of these coins. So basically, if you have a pre-mine or pre-mint coin, you get to lock up a certain percentage of these tokens and gradually release them over time. So the user cannot just sell everything, and you cannot just sell everything all at once. This method generally increases the confidence of coin holders that the market won't just be flooded by private investors or venture capitalists or the team, right? So this does tend to increase your user confidence. But when you're thinking about your vesting schedules and how much gets released, these could cause significant cliffs, such as a large percentage being vested at regular intervals can totally kill a price if people start to sell their tranches. Usually vesting schedules are logical and take place slowly over many months or years, even in bits and pieces. And this is what's going to keep your token price like the most stable. Some coins also build in staking features, right? So a staking feature is going to be where these coins or tokens are usually locked up for some period in return for a reward or interest rate. So if a token price shoots up while a user has it staked, it will not be on any exchange which cuts the supply to boost the price, but the users who staked can't exit the locked asset until their staking period is over. So basically, this also means that staking can be a gamble because if you can't remove your stake, if you can't remove your liquidity, staking, it's a gamble. Maybe it'll go up, maybe it won't. It's locked. There's nothing you can do about it. All of this, though, should make you think that ultimately your token value relates to the market basics of supply and demand. As a new market maker, as a developer, you're going to want to pay close attention to ways to control your supply of continuous tokens and increase your demand for them. Maybe you want to think about building in token caps to limit the number. This could maintain a constant supply so that if your demand rises or stays constant, the value of the token will increase. Even if you do create a token with infinite or very large mints, you can still control supply with buybacks and burns, or destroy them to encourage appreciation of your asset. So these are all many factors that you're going to want to think about to determine the value of your token. And frankly, you can do things like these buybacks and burns and control your vesting and staking schedules and figure out if you want to pre-mine or pre-mint, and figure out if you want like deflationary or inflationary tokenomics. Honestly, there's a lot of factors that are just straight up out of your control because the market is illogical and unpredictable. The power of hype and sentiment cannot be understated here. But if you design your tokenomics to account for and control your supply in using actual logic implementation, you can build user trust and organically add value to your token and just play, hopefully the long game. All right. So next, let's talk a little bit about allocations for the team. Some projects like to talk about giving themselves zero allocation because they think it's going to increase their user confidence, because if the users think that the team is taking zero of the tokens, that means that they, the users, and the free market can take 100% of the tokens. This is a bit of a fallacy, though, because it's not actually that great. The only time that this is actually a reasonable option of the team not taking any allocation for their project is where there's a massive benefactor supporting the project. Like, say you are just getting tons and tons of funds from someone like Binance, maybe you can take no allocation, but frankly, developers, you're going to need funds to sustain your project, especially if you're trying to just not crash and burn in a week or two. Running a project is expensive. If you have to hire teams, when you're hiring, graphics teams or front end developers or full stack, it gets very expensive very fast, depending on what sort of a project you're trying to make. Try to allocate 14 to 40% of the tokens for treasury team and marketing expenses. It's generally a good thing to also figure out how you can create consistent revenue, but also whatever your allocation design is, make sure you tell the users, make sure it's all written out there in black and white, and that you are going to take, say, 20% of the tokens. Of those, 5% goes to the team, and 15% goes to treasury marketing. You're going to want to tell people where the funds are going, because this is the blockchain. People can see where every transaction goes, and when they see money stacking up in wallets, or every time they trade a token, a fraction of it goes to a wallet. You need to be able to account to that to your community. Emissions. So back to a little bit more of tokenomics and value stuff. Emissions are going to refer to how many of your native tokens are minted every block. An emission rate that's too high will give you really high APRs, which your degen users will absolutely love. But again, this is going to reflate in inflationary tokenomics, and it's going to overinflate your token supply, which could cause a price crash of your token. Opposite, if you have an emission rate that is too low, it might provide more realistic APR and more consistent token growth, but it could result in a really boring farming experience for your users. So you just might not get much buy-in to begin with. You need to offer people generally something when you start, some sort of a give back to encourage the community to buy into your token or to buy into your DAO. Do keep in mind that especially if you're a farm, or some sort of a farm-like project, you need to consider how you're allocating your native and non-native assets, right? Because by distributing tokens to non-native pools, your pools are going to be earning your native token for free, which means they don't need to have any exposure to the native token, and this is going to incentivize investors to dump the token faster. What I would say is generally start with 70% of your emissions going to the native liquidity and staking, regardless of, unless you're an NFT or something like that. Like if you're dealing with some sort of a token or farm, start with approximately 70% of your emissions going to native liquidity and staking, and then you can adjust it from there. That should hopefully prevent some of your user dump. So let's talk a little bit more about liquidity. So liquidity is going to be the sum of the value stored in all your native LP pair. And this value is pretty important because it represents the native token's resistance to price movement. It's considered to be like the blood in the pig. Like I haven't heard too many people use that recently, but it's more like your business school types will sometimes pull that one out. Unless there are multiple native assets, your total native liquidity, your TNL, is going to be double the amount of real coins, right? One thing that you're going to want to be thinking about is how investors perceive your total native liquidity to your total value locked, your TVL ratio. Now, normally most projects will only display the TVL, not the TNL. But being able to calculate your TNL to TVL as a developer is really important because it's one of the most reliable indicators of project health. It's going to show you the relationship between how much value can be extracted from your project and how much value is in pursuing that extraction. When you're considering how much liquidity to provide in your brand new project, this is going to be a key contributor to how you start off and how your project is going to survive. It's going to basically reflect the amount of money available to buffer against token price movements or for investors to extract. If you have a smaller amount of liquidity add, it means that you're going to have a massive spike in value of your asset during your token launch, but it also means that you're going to have a massive crash once everything opens up and your project really starts. It's just going to crash and burn. And this can be a very bad user experience, and it's going to detract a lot of people when they see, some sort of a tragic, 80% dump. The better user experience comes from providing enough tokens to prevent this kind of crash at the beginning. But it's also important to understand that you're going to get some reduction in price anyways, because your hype people are going to be looking to dump your token anyways and turn a quick profit, because that's kind of the nature of a lot of DeFi at this moment. If your liquidity is locked or burn, this is something that users really look for and they really care about because it can represent a team's financial commitment to the project. But it can also represent another hidden factor, and that's going to be the amount of team liquidity provided could deal with how scammy. If there's like a fair launch and it's rigged for insiders, it could start out with a suspiciously low amount of team liquidity followed by like bot buys, and this is just not a great idea. So providing team liquidity at a fair value usually prevents this sort of stuff from occurring. So yeah, we already talked a little bit about the golden ratio for farms and staking, and that's going to be looking at your total native liquidity for your TVL ratio to like check for health. All right, let's talk a little bit about overcoming hype cycles. Cryptocurrencies live and die by hype cycles, which is going to be that giant explosion of activity at a project launch, huge volume, and it's going to push the asset to some incredible heights due to FOMO and low liquidity, and then you're going to crash and burn. Sometimes to amazing amounts. I've seen things crash and like draw down 90, 99% in a few hours. Hopefully you don't crash and burn by 90%, but some sort of a drop down when you leave your hype cycle is going to be expected, so you need to plan accordingly. Honestly, being able to survive your dip and mitigate damage is the breaking for like why so many projects fail and why some succeed, because you're going to be able to get investors to like buy back in. This is usually the point where your marketing budget, and remember we need a team allocation, is going to need to go into full effect, because once you lose the initial hype, a lot of investors are just going to try and move on. So if you can like keep people interested and keep them moving and allocate a budget for that, or like give them, some sort of a separate price discussion channel so your main channel isn't flooded with negative price talk, that is so important, because your goal is to hold the attention of these investors to ensure your project has the investor base to increase price and liquidity for a longer time. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some special elements, right? There's a lot of different types of things that a user is going to look for, and it's really important to be able to know your community when we're talking about this. A special element is going to be, why would someone actually want to hold your native asset instead of just dumping it or trading it or just immediately moving on? And in these sorts of things, you're really going to want to know who your investor is, and you're going to want to be able to listen to the feedback of your community investors, right? Who's looking into your project and who wants it? How can you give utility to your token, right, or to your asset? Does your token give them governance rights, or maybe profit or revenue sharing, or some sort of an exclusive earning potential? Maybe you're like Bored Ape Yacht Club and you get some sort of a cool membership and like crazy parties or events. Maybe it's an exclusive payment methods or a way to work with a partner of yours. These are all things that you're going to want to consider after your launch and have lined up probably like at your launch to tell your community why they should be holding whatever your asset is. All right, your team. The importance of your team cannot be understated. So one of the things that you're going to want to think about is seniority matters. It really does. I know the DeFi space is so new and it's really hard to be able to get, someone who's particular senior, but honestly, the wisdom, experience, and the network that comes with somebody who's been around the block with crypto before is an absolute critical predictor of success. A strong existing network in crypto is something that, can't really be valued. You also have to consider that your project is probably basically a startup, right? You're not an established business. You're just trying to get everything going. So you're going to have a smaller team where everybody is going to be wearing many different types of hats. And so in this sorts of a situation, ideally everyone has some sort of a specialty and some sort of an experience that they can really take and run, but they also need to be able to be a team player and cover, other areas of expertise. And this is where someone who's been around for a while really matters, because one experienced pro can absolutely do the work of like a dozen brand new people that you just hired off of Upwork. So you want that. It might take you a little longer and it's really hard to find, but it's absolutely worth it to put the time and effort into assembling the best team you can. All right, security. Security is the most important aspect of your project. A poorly designed code is going to result in a poor user experience or exploits. An exploit can drain your contract, give funds to a hacker, lock funds forever. It's just a bad time. You don't want anything to do with that. As we all know, DeFi is built on smart contracts, and once a smart contract is deployed, they're immutable. They can't be changed. So you need to take extreme care when you're pushing your contract to the public. You probably want to make sure, if you have a complex code base or any sort of a unique code base off of something that's been run a million times, you're going to want to invest in an audit. And you're probably going to want to make sure that it's pen tested on top of that audit. And after you've had that audit and that pen test, you want to pen test it again to make sure any changes that happen during the audit work. Deploying a project first and then getting an audit, not a great idea, because it pretty much serves no purpose except as a marketing gimmick. So you want to get your audit prior to your deployment so you can make all the changes you need behind the scenes. It's also really important that not all audits are created equally, right? So take the time to actually understand who your audit firm is and what they're pointing out and what sorts of advice they're giving you, if any at all. Bug bounties. Definitely consider using bug bounties, because this is going to incentivize your community to go through and try and find things that may have been skipped in your audit and pen testing and internal processes. Also, just work with us. So we provide free contract reviews, and we also provide consulting services. We have seen all sorts of crazy situations, all sorts of exploits, all sorts of hacks, all sorts of scams and rugs and crazy situations. We're a pretty good wealth of information in terms of creating a successful project. So just come on in, shoot me a DM, chat in our chat. We are always here to answer questions. Like, this is literally why I pay people. We pay people to answer questions because we want to answer your questions, because we want to make DeFi safer and more enjoyable for everyone. Math. I know, you probably didn't think that I was going to bring up math, but math is probably one of the most underrated factors in a project. There's a lot of math that goes into your smart contracts and why they work. And honestly, mathematical and logic incompatibilities are one of the most common reasons for critical failures that I've seen. You have to remember, a smart contract is a computer program. Computers have limits. A lot of the equations that are going to go into your project's design, like emission curves or mint equations or token distributions, all of these crazy equations that you may not even have realized are going to be going into all of the libraries and foundations of your project, they have irrational numbers and they have limits. So you'll notice that many of the equations on the screen are going to have e's and i's and other sorts of irrational numbers. Computers hate irrational numbers, so you need to really think about limits and rounding up and scaling. Because if you don't linearize your equation or estimate a curve, your computer is going to overflow and your code is going to crash and burn. Anyways, you don't need to know everything, but math is something that you need to actually think about, and at the very least, make sure that your logic flow is sound and the libraries you're using are compatible with each other. Sustainability. This is a marathon. This is not a sprint. When you're here in DeFi, you need to make sure that, again, your allocation is there, that you have a treasury. And honestly, users like to see some amount of a treasury there. Obviously, you don't want to get too greedy with it, but the amount a team can spend on a project signals both commitment and ability to accomplish goals, as well as get through unfortunate events. It's something that might not always seem fair to the user, but again, you're going to come up with all sorts of situations that are going to need to be dealt with, and if you're not able to deal with them, everybody loses. Also, if we're prospectively analyzing a team's propensity to pull some sort of a scam, how financially committed to a project is one way that you can think about an indicator of persistence. It's also part of the reason why KYC services are honestly among some of the best values in the business, because it provides a permanent signal of not only commitment to the project, but financial outlay. You're also going to want to mind your supply expansions, which is the expansion of your tokens that a farm mints or project mints. If you don't keep an eye on this, you're just going to wind up getting, inflation and all sorts of unfortunate problems that happen from these large emissions. You need to be able to put on a show without being completely full of shit. So if we can think about it, what do LARPers and yield farm operators or DeFi project operators have in common? Generally, both of them are pretending to be something they're not. And this is not necessarily a bad thing. So when you're talking and marketing, you're going to generally try and have some sort of utility or mechanism that makes your farm sustainable. And honestly, while some of these may work, a lot of them may not. And some of these factors that you're going to advertise and that users look for are just recycled old cards that don't necessarily work. But honestly, the promise of things to come that may or may not actually work or may or may not actually come creates people, it makes people want to just hold your asset, which creates a sync that's honestly more effective than any one of the syncs you may or may not be promising. But on the flip side, you can't straight up lie to your people, because if you have straight up lied or just done something, the second that something goes wrong in your project, and something will always go wrong in your project, unhappy investors can see through these blatant lies, and you'll end up in a FUD cycle that you just can't get out of. So it's a careful balance of being able to hype your community and say yeah, just wait until it's coming next quarter, we're going to do the thing, and actually being able to follow through to some degree. Finally, know your investor. Who is your community? Are they the short-term hype apes, or are they conservative investors? Do you have pre-farm people? Do you have airdrop hunters? Once you know who your ideal audience is, things get a little bit easier. All right. In the last part of this, we're just going to talk briefly about, sorts of services that we do at RugDoc that can increase user confidence, and honestly, how we can help you a little bit further. Users generally like to look for liquidity locking or multi-sig wallet so that they think and understand that a token can only go down so far and that not just one person has access to a wallet. Users also generally like to look for reviews. They want to know that you have a contract that has been verified, is legible, and that has been submitted for review. If your contract needs an audit, or even if it doesn't necessarily need an audit, showing that commitment to security, commitment to follow through, and that financial commitment that you put up for an audit process, it really does increase user confidence and it makes people want to buy in more. And then finally, KYC, like these know your customer services, identity validation. When people understand that you're not just some anonymous team, that someone knows who you are somewhere, this is going to increase users' buy-in, right? Because they feel that you are going to be less likely to try and operate dishonestly and that you are going to be there for the long haul. Overall, plan and prepare early for whatever you do, like start your design process much sooner than you think. Take a browse through our review process and cross-reference similar projects so you can see how the community reacted and what sorts of contract do's and don'ts that we've found in them. Every time you create a new project or a new layer and you've changed anything, you need to get a new audit. Make sure that your community has proper and constant communication. Please talk to us. Like, we want to tell you about the latest trends and tips and things that we're seeing. We want the community to be able to work with you and trust you. And we want to be able to push projects that we like and shove people their way. And do also make sure that your team can move with and ahead of trends, because depending on what chain you are, things come and they go and they die. And there's all sorts of weird cycles that happen in DeFi. And you're going to want to be able to be in the right place at the right time. In terms of marketing, we provide a lot of marketing services. If you're a project that has passed certain review standards, plan ads ahead of time. Even if it's not with us, you should really consider having ads somewhere and banners somewhere. Attractive banners are shown to perform much better. You're going to want banners before your launch and after your launch to try and make sure that you can get through that initial crash and dip. Changing your banner is going to make people look at it because it attracts fresh attention. If you work with us, use all available badges and make sure that we have every available badge. So if you have a low risk badge, make sure it's up there. If you have locked liquidity, make sure it's up there. If you have an audit, make sure it's up there. Please provide us updates to make sure that we have all the accurate badging, because community wants to be able to search for these things. Like I said, we do provide advertising services. You have to be reviewed first. You have to have some level of acceptable risk. We can consult and make sure that everybody's on the right track beforehand. We provide metric tracking on all ads, and our advertisements are conditional. But I will say we have 40,000 unique visitors who see our site every day. And so advertisements generally go a long way. Even just making sure your project is listed on our launch calendar brings increased traffic, because we have this giant launch calendar that users love to check to make sure that they're the first person to be able to get into projects and their calendars are set. So please make sure, if you request a review with us, that you also make sure that you get on our launch calendar. We know from marketing that we account for 50 to 80% of our project's traffic. We have a lot of interesting insights that we can talk to you about. And honestly, 80% of the teams that advertise with us are repeat advertisers. 60% of these take a larger package for the next project because, well, generally works. But anyways, that's where I'll end it. Please come and say hello, hang out in our chats, hang out in our socials. We want to hear from you. And with that, I am happy to take questions.
I was just a couple questions from me while we wait, if that's okay. I remember you were mentioning that not all audits are created equal. And of course, audits are something that in research we look for every time we're checking out a protocol. And something that we've noticed in our research is there's a few major players in crypto that we come across a lot. I'm specifically thinking of Certic, Slow Mist, Hackin, QuantStamp. And I'm wondering, from these names that you hear maybe 2 or 3 times a day sometimes, are there any of them that stand out as maybe higher quality than the others? Or are there any that you would want to see more than just an audit from them? I know that's a tough question because you don't want to call anybody out, but if there's a trend, I guess I want to know about it.
Definitely. And this is actually a question that we get asked about pretty often, and to the point where we wrote an article on it, kind of comparing and contrasting, what different audit firms will give you. Generally, what I think is going to make the best audit is going to be an audit firm that takes into account both your actual project's audit, like does your code work, does it function as intended, is it vulnerable to exploits, but also takes into account user security. So these are going to be firms like Halborn, like PeckShield, like Paladin. These are all things that are going to look at both the user experience and the developer experience, and these are really important. And users are starting to get more savvy and educated that there are these differences and that they should care about firms that are specifically going out of their way to make sure that governance risks are described or governance risks are mitigated. There are some large audit houses that are out there that do not necessarily have the best practices and will more or less just audit something, even if it has serious governance or user risks. And they've just been able to get away with this because they're, older players in the game. And so they've just kind of built a reputation from being there earlier. But yeah, definitely important to think about what is actually in the audit report, and to, even if you don't understand all of it, to leaf through it and try and make sure that there's a section that's going to just go through the code. As a developer, you also want to think about firms like Halborn or Paladin that are really going to work with you to improve your code when a problem is found. A lot of firms like Certic will just basically say there is a problem, and they'll note it on your audit, but they don't give you a solution. And that can be very frustrating for a developer to not be able to have that follow through and that follow up with your audit firm, because you've just shelled out tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars. And you got your audit report back and basically says, oh, this thing is vulnerable. Oh, this is a medium severity thing. And then what? Do you just have to imagine a solution to that? And firms like Paladin, they really will walk you through, okay, we've found these things that could be a problem. Here are our suggestions. Let's figure out how we can implement them together and pen test them. So yeah, things that are important to think about as a developer and a user.
Great advice there. So sometimes going with the trendy audit company may not give you the after audit support that you really need, especially as a startup developer. Whereas I know you mentioned Paladin, and what was the other one?
Halborn and PeckShield.
Halborn.
Yep. Halborn and PeckShield are also firms that we really do like working with because, like I said, they take into account a user experience and they really do work with you to actually follow through on their suggestions and implement them successfully. But yeah, like I said, some firms out there, they don't really do that. You just get left high and dry. And if you're a new developer, that's a very frustrating experience. Even if you're an experienced developer, that's a frustrating experience.
I do see we have some questions coming in the chat. Are you able to see those on your end?
Yep, let me take a look. Okay. So yeah, the launch calendar is pretty good. I'm just browsing through. I'm proud of our launch calendar as well. What are some of the common recurring weaknesses that we come across in smart contracts? This is a really good question. These sorts of common recurring weaknesses, we really find projects that are basically just copy pasting forks without actually understanding what's in the fork. So especially when you come up with these new projects like, say, Wonderland, right? Great project, still going, awesome committed team. Nobody's going to argue with the success of Wonderland, right? But the code base is actually pretty risky. And so if you're just copy pasting without understanding the full implications of what you're copy pasting, you can wind up with some of these like incompatibilities and logic failures, and you can wind up completely breaking the code when you try and just like make a small minor change. Another thing that we find that happens in a lot of smart contracts through the audit process is they don't test after the audit. And so maybe the audit says like, oh, we found something, we're going to suggest you change this, I don't know, this line over here. And you either don't actually implement the suggestion correctly, or just this suggestion is inappropriate given some sort of an update to the libraries, and you wind up just with like these weird incompatibilities, and you can get like crappy overflow situations. These are especially common when you get like new types of tokens that come out into the world, because when you add a new type of token into like an established code base for like a farm or an aggregator, sometimes they don't play well together. And again, you're just going to wind up like getting some sort of a completely broken situation, and you're not going to know about that until you do it. Cool. What else we got? RugDoc, are you a crypto girlfriend? No, I'm a crypto wife, but I own my own business, so I don't even know what that means. All right, let's see. Is there still room for new farm project these days? I think there actually are. So what is interesting about having been in the DeFi space for a while is you start to see these recurring cycles. So the whole space is so new, right? Like DeFi as we know it has only happened in the last, what, like 18 months, 20 months or so, not even 2 years old. But you see these new trends pop up. So of course, meme coins are super popular, but when you combine a meme coin with some sort of like a staking feature or a farm, you know, obviously you get like very increased interest. So you start to see like these mixes and matches, and you do start to see people like circling back for like, oh, cool, I bought all these meme tokens right now, but what can I do with it other than just hold it? And if you offer like other solutions, users generally like it. Let's see. What is a good way to get past the initial boom and crash in a price of a newly launched coin once a project begins with low liquidity? Ooh, if you have low liquidity, that's a bit of a problem. And this goes back to like those considerations for how much liquidity you want to add, and actually caution you against adding just low liquidity. So yeah, you're going to increase your asset prior to the launch if you add low liquidity. But you can also, you know, you're going to get a huge crash and burn if you don't actually add enough liquidity once your protocol actually opens up. But generally, a good way, provided you haven't completely bastardized your liquidity plan, to get past the initial boom and crash is through creating a rollout of utility features, and basically just having like a clear roadmap that like 1 week later, we're going to roll out this new feature. We're going to roll out this partnership. Being able to basically just like work with other known faces in the space, or through just good marketing campaigns. Like I cannot understate how critical good marketing is. And so, yeah, you'll probably need to hire a good designer, and that's a pain in the butt. But the more places people can see about your protocol, the more times that just flashes in front of people, you can really start to get like more organic buy-in through that if you've just like created a good marketing campaign. What are my thoughts on protocol owned liquidity for creating long-term token value like ohms? Okay, so ohms are super popular right now, and I think they can be done very well, but a lot of the ohm forks that we see have a lot of inherent governance risks, and there's something that I think users are starting to understand now because they became trendy and everybody started to jump into it. And once people just all started to jump into it, you know, it just sort of became scam city after a couple rounds of this. I think that a protocol and liquidity and creating these like DAOs can be amazing things. I think if they're carried out well by a good team, you really can get these very interesting phenomena where you're getting people who are buying real estate together, or are getting shares of all sorts of stuff, or you have a giant protocol treasury that lets you give distributions to all of your users. And these are fantastic. But because of the inherent governance risk, you really need to trust the team in your own forks and your team forks and all these other types of forks. So with these sorts of things, I would want a team to consider, have they like implemented third-party multi-sig on their contracts? Like, do they have KYC? Did they get this stuff audited? Basically trying to show the community as many features as possible, that they're there for the long haul and they're not just going to try and rip you off in a week. So yeah.
A lot of times with those types of projects, the proof is in the pudding too. I think
Definitely.
that a good example, or maybe it's not a good example, but everybody knows about Million Token. Million Token is not particularly interesting for any reason, except the person who launched it still stays behind it months later. And if you show that type of dedication, then people are going to respect you for it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Exactly. And this is where, having a team history and having people know your history is really important, because when it comes to these sorts of projects, your goal is to create user confidence in you, right? And so what have you done before? Do you have a history? Do you have a team history? Are you actually committed? Are you actually going to follow through on the things that you're laying out? If you do, it's awesome. If not, well, you're just going to have a frustrated community.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today, RugDoc. Really excited to see what protocols you say are good ones to get involved with, and going to definitely be taking your advice on avoiding ones that you consider too high risk to be worth the effort. And we certainly appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. This was really fun.